Hello and welcome back to Too Many Books. My name is Sean, and today I'd like to talk to you about Stepford Wives by Ira Levin. This particular edition that I'm showcasing in the video here is the artist edition from Suntup Editions, but this novel can be found in much cheaper trade editions wherever books are sold. I am going to talk more about the particular Suntup Editions once I'm done talking about the short novel itself, so be sure to stick around for that. I'm actually going to keep this spoiler-free for the first part. I do have some thoughts that do involve having to talk about some spoilers, but I'm going to keep that all the way to the end of the video. That way, if you are unfamiliar with the tale, nothing will be spoiled for you. For me, this was my first time having read the novel, but I was very much aware of it, aware of the twists and turns, aware of what it was about. I mean, I imagine the same case can be said for you watching this. Even the phrase Stepford wife has kind of entered the public lexicon of, modern-day phrases of that sort of perfect housewife who's just there for the beck and call of the husband. If you are not familiar with the short story, like I said, I will keep this spoiler-free, at least for the first part. It is the story of the Eberhards, who have moved to the small town of Stepford, Connecticut, and things are not quite what they seem. There's sort of an uncanny valley sort of situation going on, where all of the housewives of Stepford are very, very stereotypical stay-at-home housewives wanting to eschew all of their interests and careers, not going out and having social lives just so they can stay at home, dressed up to the nines and wanting to keep the house perfect and pristine for their husbands. And Joanna, the protagonist of this novel, feels that something is amiss in this town, and she soon starts talking with two other housewives who had recently moved to Stepford, Connecticut, who seem to agree with her. And things start taking a turn for the worst when one of her friends suddenly gets rid of her interest. She's no longer interested in tennis, and she becomes that stereotypical Stepford wife that seems a little bit off. And you're going to follow Joanna along the way as she tries to figure out what the hell is going on and try to avoid becoming one of those Stepford wives herself. As I said, you probably already know what's going to happen in this novel. You probably already know the twists and turns, but we're going to keep it nice and simple. This has been adapted several times into films, but I don't think I've even seen those films, believe it or not. But I still did expect everything that was happening within the short novel. And it is very short. This edition is under 150 pages. I mean, it's a larger trim size, but that also includes Lori Lee Brahm's illustrations. I mean, it does call itself, 3 chapters, but I don't even know if that's necessarily fair. The first chapter is like 70 pages, and the second chapter is pretty much the remainder of the novel. The third chapter is more of a quick little epilogue, a nice little Twilight Zone twist for you in the last few pages. The novel is, at least my interpretation of it, is very satirical. It's not like, overly outwardly funny, like a Monty Python skit or something, but there is a subtle wit to it. The characters are very two-dimensional. I mean, they especially the Stepford Wives, which is kind of the whole point. But even the men in Stepford, Connecticut, are very two-dimensional. They're sitting around in their men's club, and most of those characters are pretty interchangeable, with the exception of Joanna's husband and a pair of other men in the town who have very specific roles that you'll understand as the story goes on. It's also a very slow read. I mean, I was kind of expecting some sort of level of suspense, and it does eventually get there, but not until the second half, not until chapter 2. I mean, chapter 1, there's no real tension. It's just sort of an uncomfortable, almost uncanny valley atmosphere that is presented to you. I mean, yes, she's kind of weirded out and suspicious of the wives in Stepford, but there's no real danger that she seems to be facing. It's just sort of an uncomfortable underlying sense that follows you throughout the novel. Although I will say, once you actually do get to chapter 2 in the second half, it does pick up a little bit more. Maybe not to the extent that one would hope for with a lot of suspense and thriller novels, but at least a lot more so than it was in the first chapter. And then, of course, like I said, there's that chapter 3, which is more of like your Twilight Zone twist, pulling the rug out from under you sort of epilogue. Ultimately, I don't really think that the novel has aged very well, but I can't really talk about that right now without talking about some spoilers, so I'm going to hold off for right now. But if you are not familiar with the story of Stepford Wives, it's definitely one that's worth checking out. I hate to say it, it's almost a novel that probably reads better if you do know the twist and you do know where it's going, because if you don't know where it's going, you're probably going to think for this first half, man, this is boring as hell. One quick word of note is that this edition, the Suntup edition, does have an introduction by Peter Straub, which is actually taken from like the 30th anniversary edition back in 2002. It's presented as an introduction, but you should really read it as an afterword. I mean, Straub definitely knows his stuff. He is approaching it like an academic and really dissecting various scenes in his introduction, but that is precisely the problem. He gives you a synopsis of the whole plot. He's dissecting specific integral scenes in his introduction, like almost to the point where you feel like you don't need to read the novel after having read it, because he just spoiled a whole bunch of stuff for you. Even if you know where the novel is going, he's talking about the entire synopsis as if you've already just read the novel. So probably a little weak as far as introductions go, but very solid as far as afterwards go, just because, not that the content is weak, but the having no restraint on spoilers definitely doesn't help. The Suntup edition is very beautifully done. This is the artist edition, which was limited to 1,000 copies. Unlike other Suntup artist editions, this one is letterpress printed, which is just absolutely spectacular. Very, very nice Mohawk superfine paper, and it, of course, features these beautiful character paintings by Laurie Lee Brom. I will say that there is sort of a sense of irony with Laurie Lee Brom being the artist here. I mean, Stepford, Connecticut and the Stepford Wives is very much about a town where the women are playing second fiddle to the men. They're there to boost the men up. And Laurie Lee Brom, while a very established and very creative and artistic artist, in her own right, she is perhaps overshadowed by her husband, Gerald Brom, who is an artist and author who publishes synonymously as Brom. He doesn't do Gerald Brom. He just kind of, hijacks the last name. So it's kind of, like I said, a bitter irony, which might be the point for a satirical novel like this, to have the artist be one who is almost shadowed in a way by her own husband, much like the Wives of Stepford, Connecticut. The numbered edition and the artist edition are both still available directly through Suntup, so you can actually find them both for cheaper on the secondary market, which is a damn shame because it is a beautiful production. And you can get on the secondary market, you can get a nice letterpressed book with its incredible artwork, a hot pink slipcase to boot, all for like little over half of what the retail price is. The numbered edition is signed by Straub and Laurie Lee Brom, whereas this artist edition is just signed by Brom. Or if you're like me, you can supplement it with a nice little signed Peter Straub bookplate. So anyways, that's as far as I'll go spoiler-free wise. So if you are clicking off now because you don't want to go into spoiler territory, thank you very much for watching. Consider subscribing to the channel. I do at least one book review a week with plenty of unboxing videos in between here and there. But if you don't mind sticking around for spoilers, I'm going to talk about my my little gripe about the novel and why I don't feel like it aged very well. But I wanted to give you, plenty of warning. So here we are, and in just a few seconds, we'll remove our own restraints on spoilers. So anyways, if you're not familiar with the twist is that the women of Stepford, Connecticut are being replaced by automatons. And it is described like Disney World automatons. Disneyland, I guess, because this was published back in the 70s. One of the neighbors in Stepford, the president of the men's club, used to work for Disney. There are allusions to Disney, such as them watching on television and seeing the presidential automatons of JFK and LBJ on the TV. And those are what's replacing the women, which I guess is fine, but unfortunately 50 years later, it seems a little too silly. I mean, not that I can't discredit Ira Levin for it. I'm sure it worked really well back in the 1970s, but it's one of those things that didn't quite age very well. I mean, you've probably, even if you haven't been to Disney, you're probably aware of, like, you know, maybe the Carousel of Progress or the Hall of Presidents and the figures within them. It's not really like, you know, a Madame Tussauds wax figure. They seem robotic. They don't seem natural. So the idea that these very, very hyper-realistic robots are replacing the women and using Disneyland as the kind of basis for the evidence of how this could work just seems silly. Like, I can't possibly imagine these automatons being that realistic to, you know, straight up replace and fool everybody who has encountered these women in their lifetime. I mean, obviously it's meant that the characters, that the men in this novel are supposed to be very flat characters, but even just the thought of them just replacing their wives with robots just seems so goofy. I mean, it's one of those things where the idea is phenomenal, and I'm sure in modern adaptations, giving it a better approach to the reasoning behind it might go a little bit further. I also wish they actually explained what was happening to the women. I mean, the implication is that the wives are being killed, but, like, what are you doing to dispose of the bodies? I don't know, it leaves that part too open-ended. Maybe that's a little too, you know, maybe too explanatory for what I want, but it's one of those questions I still had by the end of the novel. It left a little too much to be desired by keeping it as simple as it did. But, I mean, all in all, I can't complain about the novel. It was still a very fun read, even if it might seem a little goofy in hindsight. I mean, I grew up playing, you know, Mario 64 and Zelda, Ocarina of Time, and I never once, while looking at those graphics, while those graphics were incredible back then, and said, wow, these beats, you know, the old Mario, the 8-bit Mario, there was never a point where I was like, wow, Mario looks so realistic, you know? So I guess that's just, it's one of those things where it just didn't quite work for me in that regard, but overall, the story itself did. So anyways, if you stuck around this long, thank you very much for watching. Once again, please consider subscribing to the channel here to check out more of these book reviews or unboxing videos that I do. It's definitely a great production. I can't fault them for that. And Suntup absolutely knocked it out of the park for this one. And it's a damn shame that this title didn't sell nearly as well as a Suntup title should have sold. But anyways, check out Suntup Editions, check out the Stepford Wives by Ira Levin, and we'll see you around next time.